All right, welcome back to our daily read aloud, My Side of the Mountain. We are on page 124 today, for those of you that follow along. And the last time we were reading, Bando finally showed up. It was a Christmas miracle. I almost called him Thorough, because that's what Bando calls him. But Sam was really excited to see him. Who remembers what Christmas gifts he made for Bando? Noah?
Didn't he make like a whistle or something?
Well, they made those reed whistles together, but he made him something he could wear. Cadence?
Like, deerskin.
I think moccasins, right?
Yeah.
Did he make him moccasins? Something out of deerskin. I think it was
He
moccasins.
was working on moccasins.
So they're like those shoes I wear a lot that are like light brown, small shoe, like they look like Indian shoes. They've got beads on the front.
Oh, yeah.
So those are moccasins. Emma?
And he wore someone say I know your outfit.
Yes. So I will go back and read that page. So they're having a great time at Christmas. Bando said, Thorough, I need rest. I've had a long day getting out here. And so then on Christmas, I will just start there. So Sam said he slept in his clothes. Yes.
And Brandon was talking about how, like, people were seeing him.
Good. Okay. So do you want to explain more about that? What did he bring up in his pockets that he read to him?
He read a newspaper about how people were seeing him, and he thought they didn't see him.
Yep.
He was being sneaky. Like, the hunter saw him stealing a deer.
Yep. And the little old woman with the strawberries, she reported him. So people are starting to say there's a wild boy here. And they've got all sorts, so people in the news, there's newspaper articles about this wild boy in the mountains. So Bando brought all these newspaper clippings up, and Sam is like, have you been talking and telling people about me? He's like, no, but people have been seeing you. So I think that's about all we read. So I will start rereading a couple paragraphs, but this is the start of Christmas morning. It was Christmas when we awoke. Breakfast was light, acorn pancakes, jam, and sassafras tea. Bando went for a walk. I lit the fire in the fireplace and spent the morning creating a feast from the wilderness. I gave Bando his presents when he returned. He liked them. He was really pleased. I could tell by his eyebrows. They went up and down and in and out. Furthermore, I knew he liked the presents because he wore them. The onion soup was about to be served when I heard a voice shouting in the distance. I know you were there. I know you were there. Where are you? Dad? I screamed and dove right through the door onto my stomach. I all but fell down the mountain shouting, Dad! Dad, where are you? I found him resting in a snowdrift, looking at the cardinal pair that lived near the stream. He was smiling, stretched out on his back, not in exhaustion, but in joy. Merry Christmas, he whooped. I ran toward him. He jumped to his feet, tackled me, thumped my chest, and rubbed snow in my face. Then he stood up, lifted me from the snow by the pockets on my coat, and held me off the ground so that we were eye to eye. He sure smiled. He threw me down in the snow again and wrestled with me for a few minutes. Our formal greeting done, we strode up the mountain. All right, how excited would you guys be?
Very.
Hayden?
Really excited because you haven't seen your dad in, like a lot of the
Yes. Okay. Emma?
Maybe like a little excited, but also like nervous.
Okay. I'm kind of with you. I'd be really happy to see my dad. Now, why would you maybe have some other feelings, like a little different than happy? Madeline?
It's not about that, but I thought his dad didn't believe him that he was gonna go there, but then why isn't he worried about it?
Well, at the beginning it said, Dad said, I think he thought he was going to come right back home the next day, right? But he didn't. So he knows he's out there at Gribbly Farm. So he probably has been worried about him. I'm sure my parents would be worried about me. Cadence?
He's the one who said all those things.
Oh, maybe he's the one talking to the newspaper. Noah?
But, like, I would have mixed emotions because, like, I'm happy to see him, but, like, what would he do? He said go ahead and run away, and thought I was going to come back. He would be mad at me for going away for, like, what, a month or?
He's been, at this point, I think he's been gone about half a year. So it's been a while, right? Okay, Liam?
You would get in so much trouble.
If it were my dad, I would be worried that he'd be wanting to take me back home, right? That my fun out there would be over. Angie?
This is what I'm predicting. Like, if Sam's dad had to take him home, he would have to leave right when he was really sad.
That'd be tough, right? We haven't even thought about if Sam has to leave his mountain. At this point, it'd be really hard to do that. Frightful would probably be the hardest part, right? You'd have to figure out what to do with her. Alex?
Or maybe scared.
Yeah, maybe a little scared.
Sometimes people, like, once he's hiding cameras everywhere, their body.
Okay.
Start finding the kid.
Okay. All right, well, let's find out what happens, eh? All right. Well, son, he began, I've been reading about you in the papers and could no longer resist the temptation to visit you. I still can't believe you did it. His arm went around me. He looked real good, and I was overjoyed to see him. How did you find me? I asked eagerly. Well, I went to Mrs. Fielder, and she told me which mountain. Who was Mrs. Fielder? Angie?
The little one.
Yes, so she had a newspaper article talking about meeting Sam. So he went and found her, and she pointed him up at the right mountain. At the stream, I found your raft and ice fishing holes. Then I looked for trails and footsteps. When I thought I was getting warm, I hollered. Am I that easy to find? Well, you didn't have to answer, and I'd probably have frozen in the snow. He was pleased and not angry at me at all. He said again, I just didn't think you'd do it. I was sure you'd be back the next day. When you weren't, I bet on the next week, then the next month. How's it going? Oh, it's a wonderful life, Dad. When we walked into the tree, Bando was putting the final touches on the venison steak. Dad, this is my friend, Professor Bando. He's a teacher. He got lost one day last summer and stumbled into my camp. He liked it so well that he came back for Christmas. Bando, meet my father. Bando turned the steak on the spit, rose, and shook my father's hand. I am pleased to meet the man who sired this boy, he said grandly. That means who raised this boy. I could see that they liked each other and that it was going to be a splendid Christmas. Dad stretched out on the bed and looked around. I thought maybe you'd pick a cave, he said. The papers reported that they were looking for you in sheds and houses, but I knew better than that. However, I never would have thought of the inside of a tree. What a beauty. Very clever, son. Very, very clever. This is a comfortable bed. He noticed my food caches, stood and peered into them. You got enough to last until spring? I think so, I said. If I don't keep getting hungry visitors all the time, I winked at him. Well, I would wear out my welcome, but by a year if I could, but I have to go get back to work soon after Christmas. How's Mom and all the rest? I asked as I took down the turtle shell plates and set them on the floor. She's marvelous. How she manages to feed and clothe those 8 youngsters on what I bring her, I don't know, but she does it. She sends her love and says that she hopes you are eating well-balanced meals. The onion soup was simmering and ready. I gave Dad his. First course, I said. He breathed deeply of the odor and downed it boiling hot. Son, this is better onion soup than the chef at the Waldorf can make. That's a very famous restaurant. Bando sipped his, and I put mine in the snow to cool. Your mother will stop worrying about your diet when she hears all about this. Bando rinsed Dad's soup bowl in the snow, and with great ceremony and elegance, he could really be elegant when the occasion arose, poured him a little turtle shell of sassafras tea. Quoting a passage from one of Dickens' food-eating scenes, he carved the blackened steak. It was pink and juicy inside, cooked to perfection. We were all proud of it. Dad had to finish his tea before he could eat. I was short on bowls. Then I filled a shell. A mound of sort of fluffed mashed cattail tubers, mushrooms, and dogtooth violet bulbs, smothered in gravy thickened with acorn powder. Each plate had a pile of soaked and stewed honey locust beans, mixed with hickory nuts. The beans are so hard it took 3 days to soak them. It was a glorious feast. Everyone was impressed, including me. And when we were done, Bando went down to the stream and cut some old dried and hollow reeds. He came back and carefully made us each a flute with the tip of his penknife. He said the willow whistles were too old for such an occasion. We all played Christmas carols until dark. Bando wanted to try some complicated jazz tunes, but the late hour, the small fire dancing and throwing heat, and the snow insulating us from the winds made us all so sleepy that we were not capable of more than a last slow rendition of taps before we put ourselves on and under skins and blew out the light. Before anyone was awake the next morning, I heard Frightful call hungrily. I had put her outside to sleep, as we were very crowded. I went out to find her. Her Christmas dinner had been a big piece of venison, but the night air had enlarged her appetite. I called her to my fist, and we went into the meadow to rustle up breakfast for the guests. She was about to go after a rabbit, but I thought that wasn't proper fare for a post-Christmas breakfast, so we went to the stream. Frightful caught herself a pheasant, while I kicked a hole in the ice and did a little fishing. I caught about 6 trout and whistled Frightful to my hand. We returned to the hemlock. Dad and Bando were still asleep, with their feet in each other's faces, but both looking very content. I built the fire and was cooking the fish and making pancakes when Dad shot out of bed. Hayden?
Is Frightful not on a leash anymore?
Sometimes she is, but she doesn't have to be. So she's totally trained, so when he calls her, she'll fly down to his wrist, and now he's got that big glove that he made out of the deer hide so he doesn't get scratched. Noah?
What's a dog-tooth bowl?
Okay, dogtooth violet bulb. So that's a plant. So remember we talked about a lot of plants have roots and things underground that you can eat. So a violet bulb is a wild flower, and if you dig it up underground, it's going to have something that looks kind of like an onion attached on it. So you can eat that stuff. So he goes and pulls all that out of the ground to eat. All right. So he was cooking the fish, making pancakes when Dad shut out of bed. "Wild boy," he shouted. "What a smell. What a purposeful fire. Breakfast in a tree. Son, I toil from sunup to sundown, and I never have lived as well as you." I served him. He choked a bit on the acorn pancakes. They are a little flat and hard. But Bando got out some of his blueberry jam and smothered the pancakes with an enormous portion. Dad went through the motions of eating this. The fish, however, he enjoyed. And he asked for more. We drank sassafras tea, sweetened with some of the sugar Brando had brought us, rubbed our turtle shells clean in the snow, and went out into the forest. Dad had not met Frightful. When she winged down out of the hemlock, he ducked and flattened out in the snow, shouting, "Blast off!" He was very cool towards Frightful until he learned that she was the best provider we had ever had in our family. And then he continually praised her beauty and admired her talents. He even tried to pet her. But Frightful was not to be won. She snagged him with her talons. They stayed away from each other for the rest of Dad's visit, although Dad never ceased to admire her from a safe distance. Bando had to leave 2 or 3 days after Christmas. He had some papers to grade, and he started off reluctantly one morning, looking very unhappy about the way of life he had chosen. He shook hands all around and then turned to me and said, "I'll save all the newspaper clippings for you, and if the reporters start getting too hot on your trail, I'll call the New York papers and give them a bum steer." That means he would give them like false information to get them off his trail. I could see that he rather liked the idea and departed a little happier. Dad lingered on for a few more days, ice fishing, setting my traps and snares, and husking walnuts. He whittled some cooking spoons and forks. On New Year's Day, he announced that he must go. "I told your mother I would only stay for Christmas. It's a good thing she knows me, or she might be worried." "She won't send the police out to look for you?" I asked hurriedly. "Could she think you never found me?" "Oh, I told her I'd call her Christmas night if I didn't." He poked around for another hour or two, trying to decide just how to leave. Finally, he started down the mountain. He had hardly gone 100 feet before he was back. "I've decided to leave by another route. Somebody might backtrack me and find you, and that would be too bad." He came over to me and put his hand on my shoulder. "You've done very well, Sam." He grinned and walked off toward the gorge. I watched him bound from rock to rock. He waved from the top of a large rock and leaped into the air. That was the last I saw of Dad for a long time. All right, and that's where we'll stop in this book today. Now I have a question, though. Even just reading that out loud, it makes me feel a lot of emotion. Okay, how do you think Sam felt watching his dad leave? Eric?
Sad because he can't see him.
Yeah, I wasn't like about to start crying, but I mean, I felt a lot of emotion. If you lived in the woods and hadn't seen your dad for 6 months, and you had some company and visitors, and then they all left, can you guys like feel that heaviness of loneliness just sitting on you, kind of? Yeah. So as much as I'm sure he's glad his dad supports his living in the woods, it'd still be hard, right, to see your parents leave? I still feel like that when I go visit my parents. When I'm leaving down the driveway, it's always like, oh. It's a hard feeling, isn't it? Okay. So now, who were the Beatles? We are ready to read about George Harrison, right? Okay, so to review quickly, John Lennon lived with Aunt Mimi, right? And what was she like? Angie? Yes, George Harrison, out of all of them, had the easiest childhood. All right. Josiah, what was Aunt Mimi like?
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, that's a little sarcasm, right? Yeah, she was not great. She wouldn't even let him bring his guitar in the house, okay? So he had a rough time. Mom died and Dad left him, right? Now, what about Paul McCartney? Does anyone remember anything about him? Cadence?
Basically the same thing.
Similar story, right? But he had a happier childhood, right? We could say that. Why was it a little happier? Noah?
Because he could play.
He could play. And his dad gave him some instruments, right? Okay. Eric? Ringo Starr. He was the one we read about Friday. He had a rough time, okay? He didn't have a lot of money, but what was his major problem? Eric?
He kept there were so many things, and he needed them.
Yeah.
Stayed in the hospital for 3 years.
Yeah, the first time he was there for a year. He was in a coma for a long time. And then the second time he had to go back, he was there for 2 years. So we can imagine how terrible that would be, right?
Wait, did he get coma again?
I don't think so, but he had to go stay in the hospital for 2 more years. So he spent a lot of time there. But is that where he learned about the drums?
Yeah.
Yep. Does anyone remember how he made his own drums? Because he didn't get his own drum set for a long time. I've caught on all of you. Hayden?
Well, he made it out of metal containers.
Yep. He just made up something and used sticks in the yard, or he'd break off pieces of firewood. So he got very creative. All right, so today is George Harrison. He is the fourth and final member of the Beatles that we are going to meet today. And here we go. George Harrison had the happiest childhood of the Beatles. He didn't have the sadness of losing his mother as Paul and John did. He didn't get sick like Ringo. He was the youngest of 4 children. He was also the youngest Beatle, born on February 25th, 1943. Harold, his father, drove a bus. Louise, his mother, taught ballroom dancing. But little George wasn't interested in dancing. He wasn't interested in music either. He was a quiet boy. As he got older, he wore tight pants and grew his hair long, even though the other kids made fun of him for it. George used to tell them he kept his hair long because the scissors his father used weren't sharp, and so every snip hurt. Of course, that wasn't true. He just liked the way his hair looked. Music came into George's life when he was 14. That's when he heard a British singer named Lonnie Donegan. The music Lonnie Donegan played was similar to rock and roll, except it was faster. They called this new music skiffle, and we've heard the word skiffle a couple times talking about the Beatles. George loved the sound of it and begged his mother to buy him a guitar. She finally agreed and bought one for $5. So, you probably could not find a guitar for $5 anymore, right? But this was almost 100 years ago. George taught himself how to play. He practiced so much that the tips of his fingers started to bleed. Eventually, though, George got the hang of it. Soon he wanted a better guitar, an electric guitar. An electric guitar is much louder because when it's plugged in, the sound runs through a speaker. Even though the guitar was $60, his mother bought it for him. So does it seem like his family has a little more money than the other guys' families? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other guys, they couldn't really get stuff they wanted. But it sounds like he could. Eric?
And $60 isn't that much now.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to be, and now like $60 back then it's like $200.
Yeah, at least. It would be a lot. Yeah. Hayden?
They're like rich.
Yeah, they're like a middle class family, right? Both parents have enough money, they're not struggling to eat, and they've got enough money to buy extra things like guitars. Before long, George had formed a band with one of his older brothers, Peter. They called themselves the Rebels and played their first show at a club in Liverpool. Soon after, George was on a bus and met Paul. They started talking about music and realized they had a lot in common. They started meeting at George's house to practice music together. While Paul loved to sing, George was more interested in playing guitar. He was actually too scared to sing in front of people. Years later, he would be known as the Quiet Beatle. All right, and we will start tomorrow reading chapter 5, which is forming the band. Okay? All right, thank you everyone at home, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you tomorrow.